It's the 1600s. Somewhere off the coast of West Africa, a ship is loading its cargo for the crossing to the New World. Below deck, hundreds of people are chained together in the dark. The voyage will take 6 to 11 weeks. And among the provisions loaded by the slave traders, not out of any concern for human life, but to keep their cargo alive long enough to sell, are sacks of small, reddish-brown grain, sorghum. The same plant that scientists today call one of our most serious answers to the global climate crisis. How does one crop end up at both extremes of human history? As a tool inside one of the cruelest systems humanity ever built, and as a source of hope for saving billions of lives in the future. This is the history of sorghum. To understand how that's possible, we need to look at two portraits of sorghum that seem at first like two completely different plants. The first, the 1600s. Sorghum as forced cargo, chosen not for its value, but for its ability to survive a long voyage without rotting. The second, today. Sorghum as one of the leading candidates to become a staple crop of the future, in a world that's getting hotter, drier, and increasingly unable to rely on wheat or rice in regions hit hardest by climate change. These two portraits share the exact same thread: resilience. Sorghum survived below decks because it doesn't rot easily. Sorghum will save millions of lives in the future because it doesn't die easily, not even in the hardest, driest soil on Earth. Same trait. Two completely opposite fates. The question isn't what is sorghum anymore. The question is, where does that resilience come from? And why did it take the world hundreds of years to stop treating it like a second-class crop? The answer starts 5,000 years ago, on a river in East Sudan. The Atbara River, East Sudan. Across this dry savanna, wild sorghum once grew freely. Humans had been gathering its grain since around 8,000 years before the Common Era. But gathering wasn't the same as domesticating it. Some of the earliest archaeobotanical evidence that people had started deliberately planting and selecting sorghum comes from the site of Kassala, dated to between 3,500 and 3,000 years before the Common Era. More recent archaeobotanical research, led by archaeologist Dorian Fuller, pushes that timeline back even further, to roughly 5,000 years ago across East Sudan and western Ethiopia. That's much later than wheat or rice. And that makes sense. Wild sorghum was already tough enough to harvest straight from the landscape. There was no urgent pressure to change it, not until the populations depending on it started to grow, and they needed a steadier supply. From there, as sorghum spread into the hands of different farming communities, several regional varieties emerged, each one shaped by the demands of its particular environment. But one thing never changed: the survival instinct built into this plant long before humans ever got involved. This is what sets sorghum apart. Picture a field in the middle of a long drought. The corn's leaves turn yellow, then drop. The stalks collapse, unable to hold themselves up anymore. In that same field, sorghum is still standing. Its leaves are still green. That's not luck, that's architecture. Sorghum's stalk is coated in a thin layer of wax that slows water loss. Its roots dig far deeper than corn's or wheat's, reaching soil moisture that's still there even after the surface has cracked open. And sorghum has two more weapons rarely found together in a single plant. The first is dormancy. In severe drought, sorghum stops growing, cuts its energy use to a minimum, and waits. The moment rain falls, it springs back to life. The second is something else entirely: the stay green trait. Unlike dormancy, this isn't a full shutdown. Sorghum's leaves keep photosynthesizing at a minimal level, even in the middle of a drought, surviving while still doing the work of staying alive. Sorghum thrives in temperatures that can reach 113 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to kill most other food crops. And it needs far less water than paddy rice. That's what let it survive below decks on a slave ship without rotting. And it's the exact same trait that makes it a serious candidate to be a crop of the future in an increasingly hot world. 1. Architecture. 2. Fate. That resilience made sorghum easy to carry, and that's exactly what happened next. From East Sudan, sorghum moved along ancient trade routes connecting river valleys to the Red Sea coast. By around 2,000 years before the Common Era, it had reached India, finding perfect conditions on the Deccan Plateau, a dry highland region where even rice struggles to grow. Today, India remains one of the world's largest sorghum producers, a direct legacy of that journey. From India, sorghum kept moving along the Silk Road, reaching China by around the 2nd century before the Common Era. There, it became known as galliang, tall grain, thriving in northern regions too dry and too cold for rice. Galliang gave rise to baijiu, a fermented liquor that today is the most consumed spirit in the world by volume, a fact we'll come back to before this episode ends. In every region it reached, sorghum picked up a different name. Great millet in Africa, Indian millet in Asia. Not because anyone was confused, but because sorghum had woven itself so deeply into so many civilizations that each one felt the need to name it as its own. But not every name sorghum carried was born out of admiration. There's one leg of sorghum's journey that no civilization has ever celebrated. During the 16th century, sorghum crossed the Atlantic to the New World along 2 paths. The first, carried directly by Portuguese explorers and traders. The second, the one we open this episode with, is far darker. Sorghum, along with other African food crops, was shipped from Guinea and West Africa to the American colonies as provisions aboard slave ships, not as a trade commodity. As rations chosen because they wouldn't spoil during a voyage of 6 to 11 weeks. Keeping human cargo alive long enough to be sold at the other end. Some historians note something else. The enslaved Africans forced onto those ships carried knowledge of how to grow sorghum with them. Knowledge that was then planted, under coercion, into American soil. In Africa, sorghum was a source of food independence for the communities that grew it themselves. In America, it became part of one of the most exploitative economic machines in modern history. The same plant, 2 completely opposite functions. Sorghum arrived in America in chains. The same sorghum once chained in a ship's hold is now one of the 5 most important cereal crops on Earth, but its fate looks completely different depending on where it grows. Africa produces about 46% of the world's sorghum, the Americas about 35%. But in the United States, most sorghum isn't eaten by people at all. It becomes livestock feed and ethanol fuel. In sub-Saharan Africa, sorghum is a daily staple for hundreds of millions of the world's poorest people. In wealthy countries, sorghum is an industrial commodity. In poor countries, it's the one thing standing between millions of people and hunger. And the face of that staple food changes with every kitchen that prepares it. Asida, a thick sorghum porridge, eaten for breakfast across Sudan and Chad. Burukutu, a traditional sorghum beer in Nigeria. Jowar roti, thin and crisp, on the Deccan Plateau in India. And in Ethiopia, sorghum is often blended with or substituted for teff in injera, the fermented flatbread that's the country's national staple. Every version tells the same story of adaptation. One plant, one origin on the Sudanese savanna, wearing a different face in every hand that prepares it. And because it's seen as poor people's food, sorghum was ignored by the global agricultural research community for decades. It's funding a fraction of what wheat or corn receives, even though just as many people depend on it. As a result, smallholder sorghum yields in Africa often lag far behind what improved varieties can already deliver. In some regions, the gap runs to half the potential harvest or more, depending on the country and the soil. This isn't a failure of the plant. It's a failure of a system that chose not to invest in it. But that system is starting to change. because the world is running out of alternatives. Global temperatures are rising. Droughts that used to hit once a decade are now more frequent and more severe. In that world, the very architecture of sorghum we explored earlier, dormancy, the stay green trait, extreme heat tolerance, stops being just a biological fact and becomes one of the most viable solutions already on the table. ICRISA, an international research institute focused on crops for semi-arid regions, has spent decades developing sorghum varieties that are more productive and more pest-resistant. In several states across northern Nigeria, Kano, Jigawa, Sokoto, Kebbi, and the surrounding region, millions of households depend on sorghum every day for food, livestock feed, and income. But in recent years, farmers there faced a double threat: increasingly unpredictable drought and land that's grown too dangerous for the tall, traditional sorghum varieties, because a crop that tall becomes cover for armed groups. ICRISA and local research partners responded with a new variety called Samsorg 52, a shorter, faster-maturing sorghum that can be harvested sooner. In field adoption studies, the variety showed yield gains between 56 and 102%, with farmers' net income rising 82 to 88% compared to older varieties. This isn't a future promise. It's happening right now in the same fields that were once caught between drought and conflict at the same time. But there's a challenge harder to solve than biology: image. As incomes rise, sorghum consumption tends to fall, replaced by white rice and wheat flour. Not because sorghum is less nutritious. In fiber, minerals, and antioxidants, it actually outperforms white rice. But because rice and bread are seen as symbols of progress, while sorghum is still viewed as a second-class crop. It's the same question we asked at the start of this episode. Why has it taken the world hundreds of years to see it any other way? That story isn't finished yet. But in the fields of northern Nigeria right now, for the first time, its direction is starting to change. About 5,000 years ago, in the Atbara River Valley, humans began replanting wild sorghum instead of just gathering it. That decision gave rise to a plant that was once chained in the hold of a slave ship, and is now called, in the fields of northern Nigeria, one of the most tangible answers we have to feeding a warming world. Sorghum was never a symbol of wealth. It was never the crop of kings or conquerors. It has always belonged to the smallholder, the farmer with no choice but to grow something that could survive in soil that refused to cooperate. And yet its footprint runs deeper than it looks. The most consumed spirit on earth, more than vodka, more than whiskey, more than anything else, is made from this same plant. Humanity has spent thousands of years engineering crops to survive on this planet. Sorghum has been surviving since the beginning, without needing to be changed at all. What needs to change isn't the plant. What needs to change is how we see it. And in a growing number of fields, for the first time, that's already starting to happen.